Well, Mike, I think what the challenge facing the American people, uh, yeah, as they consider who to support in the next election, is to listen carefully to the promises, agenda, and priorities as articulated by the candidates themselves. And the president believes that's how people should make their decision.
But which ones should they listen to?
Well, again, I think that's what makes that question even more difficult than it otherwise would be. But ultimately, it will be up to the American people to take a look. Look, the president has made his views pretty clear on this in terms of who he's supporting and why. But the American people are going to have to decide for themselves.
But specifically on immigration, do you believe that he would now pursue a set of policies that no longer include deportation of all of the undocumented folks here in the country, et cetera?
Again, I think people are going to have to decide for themselves, and the truth is, people in both parties are going to have to decide for themselves. I
might look towards the White House, which has played a leading role on immigration for a long time, for guidance as to.
Yes, and I think the president's made quite clear who he intends to support in the general election, and I think you'll have ample opportunity over the course of the fall to hear him make that case. So,
I can't draw you into that.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But look, I noticed that I would expect you won't have any trouble drawing the Republican nominee's Democratic opponent into this debate. I also suspect you won't have any trouble drawing other Republicans into this debate, including people like Senator Cruz, who I saw had some pointed comments about this earlier today too. So, look, this is going to be people are going to have to work through their own assessment of this situation, and it means paying close attention to the extensive comments that candidates on both sides have made on this issue. Okay. All right, Dave.
Thanks, Josh. On Syria, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee said that Assad's continued use of chemical weapons has, quote, made a mockery of the president's red line. I want to get your reaction to that.
Well, Dave, what is clear is that we have seen the Assad regime weaponize an otherwise common industrial compound, chlorine, to carry out acts of indiscriminate violence against his own people. That's consistent with the tactics that we've seen previously, including the targeting of medical facilities and the dropping of barrel bombs out of helicopters, even in places where the Assad regime knows that civilians are located. So, this is part and parcel of what we have seen from the Assad regime for years, and it is obviously immoral. It is just the latest in a series of unspeakable acts of violence against innocent people, and it's led to a terrible situation inside that country, and it's threatened to tear that country apart, and it's tragic.
Obviously, 3 years ago, you had a deal with Russia to eliminate Assad's chemical weapons. Obviously, that didn't happen. Does the president regret not having taken more forceful steps at the time to deal with Assad?
Well, Dave, it is important to draw a distinction between what we indicated that we were prepared to do and had succeeded in doing, which is getting the Assad regime to acknowledge that they had a stockpile of sarin gas, for example. This is a weaponized chemical weapon that they could not legitimately have. And until the United States had engaged in effective diplomacy with Russia, the Assad regime had refused to even acknowledge that they possessed those kinds of chemicals. But because of the tough diplomacy of the United States and Russia, we did succeed in getting them to acknowledge that they had those chemicals, getting them to disclose the whereabouts of those chemicals, and getting them to cooperate with efforts to collect and destroy those chemicals. And that's made the world a safer place. And as bad as the situation is in Syria right now, it would be even worse if we knew that the Assad regime's stockpile of sarin gas, for example, was floating around a country that had essentially been overrun by extremists. But that has not happened because the United States and Russia succeeded in destroying their declared chemical weapons stockpile. That is the situation that we described, and that is what has improved the situation on the ground. Unfortunately, that has not prevented the Assad regime from taking a compound like chlorine and weaponizing it. The Assad regime's creativity in wreaking havoc and violence and bloodshed against innocent people apparently knows no bounds. And that's tragic, and it has rightfully earned the Assad regime international condemnation, vigorous condemnation. But the fact of the matter is, the situation would be even worse and would be even more dangerous to American troops in the region if the declared chemical weapons stockpile that the Assad regime previously had were still in existence. But it's not, because of the efforts of the United States and Russia to round up all that Syria declared that they had and destroyed it.
Is it the administration's belief that you did get all of his chemical weapons at the time and he made more, or he hid some from everybody, or you just don't know?
Well, what we know is that we rounded up and destroyed tons of it. There has been an ongoing investigation by international experts to determine if there's more. And they're still looking. And we should be vigorous about checking that out.
What else is the administration willing to do at this point to prevent more chemical attacks?
Well, again, I think what we have tried to do, and with mixed success at best, is to try to de-escalate the military conflict inside of Syria, to get countries like Russia and Iran to use their influence with the Assad regime to implement a cessation of hostilities and expedite the kind of political transition that everybody acknowledges is necessary to resolve the situation inside of Syria. And earlier this year there were several weeks of